Welcome to the Film Library, a Kanopy podcast. My name's Daniel Thompson, joined as always by my co-host, Alonso Duralde. Alonso, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing excellent. How's it going, sir?
It's going great. Now, we've had the opportunity to do a lot of these. We get to do this a little bit more remote today, but that's not going to take any of the joy out of it for me, because part of the fun of this podcast is getting to dive deep into the world of Kanopy, what it has to offer, 30,000 different titles, and taking it piece by piece, genre by genre, has been just so incredibly energizing, and I hope you felt the same way.
Oh, sure. I mean, look, I'm a longtime Kanopy fan. It's the whole world of cinema, and all you need is a library card to access it. And I think if people come away with this podcast with one thing, I just want them to know the breadth of offerings that Kanopy has that are right there waiting for you to stream.
Yeah, and even though we're not in the same room, I think we're going to have a good time. Today's genre, we're diving into the world of Black cinema. Very, very excited about it. Excited to talk some of the titles that Kanopy has. And even more excited to talk to our guests today.
Yes, no question. I think that what's really fascinating about Black cinema is the history of Black cinema is the history of cinema. There have been Black filmmakers and performers, the dawn of American cinema. Unfortunately, there have been, we also have Birth of a Nation, but you know what? We're not talking about today. We're talking about the good stuff. We're talking about the Black artists that really helped create, the motion picture as we know it. And our guest today is not only an exemplary filmmaker himself, but very much a scholar of cinema and cinema history. So I'm very excited to hear what he's got.
Why should we wait any longer? Let's dive in with Justin Simien, coming right back right after this. Here's the Film Library trivia question for today. This 2016 documentary, based on James Baldwin's Remember This House, was directed by Raoul Peck and narrated by Samuel L. Jackson. Think you know the answer? Find out after the interview. Welcome back to the Film Library, a Kanopy podcast. Alonso, we're diving into the genre of Black cinema today. I'm very excited about our guest. Tell me a little bit more about who we got today.
One of today's leading filmmakers. We're so excited to have him. He made his debut with the Sundance Award winner, Dear White People, which then spawned the Netflix series of the same name. His other films include the horror comedy Bad Hair and last year's The Haunted Mansion from Disney. And he's currently working on a limited series based on Donald Bogle's film history book, Hollywood Black. Please welcome Justin Simien.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Justin, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, man.
Of course. No, good to be here.
So, Justin, you came up into the industry as a film student and obviously is a lover of film before you started studying it. And I'm wondering what your initial exposure to Black film history was. Was it something that came to you in a class? Was it sort of, investigating on your own in the library? Where did you find these films?
I mean, my first exposure to Black cinema history is probably The Wiz, which was the first movie I can remember seeing, to be honest. And this is actually relevant because to me, it was strange that there was like a white version of the movie for whatever reason. In my brain chemistry, like an all Black cinematic universe happens to be the default, like just in terms of the way my memory is structured, in terms of like exposure to cinema and cinema that like moved me and mattered to me. But I think it was certainly like, particularly when we're talking about the doc series Hollywood Black, I think it was like around the time of Bad Hair. It was really leading up to Sundance, but certainly in the aftermath of Sundance 2020 and so much going on in 2020. I don't know. I had like one of those like Dark Night of the Soul moments as a filmmaker. And I was sort of like, what am I doing? And why is this so hard? And without even going into specifics, it was like I had broken in, I had success, but I was just really unhappy. And I started watching Black movies really just to kind of edify my spirit and remind myself that a lot of people had come before me, and I got really angry because this is 2020. This is a pandemic. Suddenly we're all at home. We have nothing to do but watch TV and watch things. And I realized how much I hadn't been taught about. For me, film school, Black cinema history is Oscar Michaud, yada, yada, blaxploitation, yada, yada, Spike Lee. That's kind of like, that's the week that you get. And I didn't know about William Greaves. I didn't know about symbiocytotoxoplasm. And I didn't know about Losing Ground. And I didn't know about Charles Lane's Sidewalk Stories in 1989. And I just kind of went on my own personal journey, sort of excavating these films. I got in touch with Donald Bogle. I wanted to adapt another one of his books into a docuseries. But this one, the rights were available. And it sort of just became this weird mix of something that I'm doing sort of for work, but mostly for me, of just trying to acquaint myself with all these filmmakers that really had kind of been buried, in terms of the discourse.
Fascinating. Justin, Alonso said in our intro, and just correctly, the history of Black cinema is the history of cinema. And it sounds like the frustrating part is that instead of us hearing about that in equal measure and the credit that should be given, we're hearing about it as a did you know? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how this slipped through the cracks, but
here's a fun fact.
Somehow all of cinematic history for people of color just didn't quite get the same limelight. So in doing this docuseries, was there something very specific? You did already mention a couple. Anything specific that stuck out to you that you couldn't believe wasn't just a glaring part of your film education beforehand?
Well, you kind of said it, which is that Black cinema history is cinema history. Cinema history actually really doesn't make a ton of sense, actually, without the Black component. And what infuriated me, but also it infuriated me, but like in the good, like, I'm going to create way, as opposed to the like, oh my God, I'm going to leave this industry forever kind of, which is that like, we're Black people and people of difference and women and gays, we're always like kind of cast as trying to like find ourselves inside this thing that's not ours, or to kind of break into this thing that isn't ours. But one of the things that it became so clear to me getting into the history is that like, this is our land to begin with.
That's
like,
right.
For instance, cinema is thought of as something that like Edison invented and the Lumiere brothers sort of like refined, and all of that is true. But when we all say cinema, what we're talking about is feature film. We're talking about a very specific aspect of cinema, which is feature films. And feature films come out of a tradition, and that tradition is called vaudeville. And vaudeville is based on minstrelsy, and minstrelsy is the first popular culture in America, and that is so clearly rooted in Black people and Black culture. Just the appetite to sit down for 2 hours and watch, a stream of entertainments that fit together like a story. That is a tradition that began in America because of the fascination that white people had with Black people and the way we entertained ourselves. The sort of, when you think about D.W. Griffith and Birth of a Nation, which of course everyone is taught ad nauseum in film school, you have to think about this. This was like a really early bet in cinema. Like, people weren't going to feature films. That wasn't like a thing. Like, he spent so much money on this movie. It had to sort of make good. This is sort of like, this is a terrible analogy, but this is the Star Wars of its time. Like, there was a certain industry in effect after Birth of a Nation. And what is it that D.W. Griffith reaches for that he can count on, that people around the country are going to show up for? Well, he reaches for minstrelsy, literally. Yes, it is a racist movie. Yes, Ku Klux Klan, and it started all of this horrible stuff in the country. But at the end of the day, he picked these subjects because America found that entertaining at the time. And you even go to sort of like the history of musicals, the musical boom in the 30s, let alone the talkies. All of this is based upon Black people, Black performance. Al Jolson doing Mammy. Everything that these kids are dancing to in the 30s is straight up jazz. This is Black culture. queer. And it just sort of was like, wow, this is like a kind of, it feels like almost like a conspiracy, because so much of what fuels cinema, and Alonso knows about this, especially when it comes to, what we call queer cinema, but really cinema is infused with all of these taboo, novel, exciting things, but they're not named. They're just sort of like sandblasted, made to look white and heteronormative. But actually, that thing that we're all going to see is black and queer. I'm sorry, it just is. And this feeling like, oh, this is my territory. This is my right to be here and to make things and to be a part of this space. That really was like the big sort of aha that was happening for me, excavating this history.
So, we've had film historians like Donald Bogle and others who have been writing about these subjects for decades. But I think for so many of us coming through any kind of academia, like you say, we're sort of left to find it on our own if, once we get past the sort of, literal token references and mentions of it. Do you think, and obviously you haven't been in academia for a while, so this might not be the right question, but I mean, do you see a change in that at all? Are these topics coming up, or is it still the same old, same old?
No, it's probably worse than ever. I mean, I don't know, but I'm looking at, all of the reports about what's happening, with the news industry. I certainly know what's happening with the mass media industry in terms of television and movies. I can only imagine that things are just as dire in academia, and people are probably sticking to their guns more than ever. But the thing about cinema is that we're kind of a few steps away. It's common parlance or common knowledge now that pop music comes from black music. That's not like I mean, for some people, of course, that is a controversial thought. But for most people, we generally accept, oh yeah, rock and roll came from, black, that was black. But the same thing is not true for cinema at all. We all kind of have because cinema is actually the most powerful thing we've come up with as humans in terms of propaganda. When we all think about the history of cinema, what usually flickers in our minds are old movies, like old black and white movies, which is white people, smiling and dancing. And so I think we're a few steps removed in popular culture for like really recognizing the contributions that women, black people, and queer people really have, contributed to the foundation of cinema. We're not quite there yet. We're still obsessed with why Barbie didn't get more Oscar nominations, fortunately.
Thank goodness. Justin, you make Dear White People just a great satire notes, dark comedy notes, so much to appreciate, so many other filmmakers you can look at and see where you drew your inspiration. After making that film, what was it like from a pressure of what you should or they think you should make next? Did you feel as though you were being pushed to make something you didn't want to make, or were you given more freedom?
No, just no to all the questions. I mean, the thing is that after Dear White People, I had a really hard time making another movie. In fact, I couldn't get another movie made. That's why the next thing from me is the Dear White People show in 2016, 2017. It's really hard. I don't know. It was disappointing to come out of Sundance and to have some of that heat and to feel like I'd broken in, but I had some other stuff that I had written that honestly, listen, Dear White People barely got in, okay, in terms of what people were ready for. My super hard-hitting gay drama about black men, some on the DL in Houston, nobody wanted to finance that for some reason for my second film. And so I kind of played the attachment game where I would attach to something and develop it while I wrote on my own. And the thing that always just sort of kept blossoming and moving forward was the stuff in my own backyard. Tara Duncan was a Netflix executive at the time who saw the movie in Sundance, and right at Sundance, she was like, hey, she planted the seed in my head of what if it was a show. And so quietly, as I toured with that movie, I was just kind of gathering notes, and suddenly those notes started to become like dialogue, and then that dialogue started to become scenes. And, a few years later, when the opportunity came across to actually pitch it as a show, I was ready to do that, and that's what went. But it was actually quite a struggle to get to the second movie. Bad Hair, which happened at a terrible time because I was like shooting Dear White People season 3, and even Haunted Mansion. Like those were steps that were like really actually hard to climb, I have to say. So I did not feel pressured other than like economically and like racially and socially.
Just those 3? That's it?
In terms of what I had to say. Just those, minor wins.
But now you have played in the Disney sandbox. You have you've gotten up to that next rung. Is it any different, or is it every time there's a new project, it's the same challenge? It's the same no, really, these are stories worth telling.
I think it's the same, and probably because of the kind of filmmaker I am, and not just because I'm Black, and not just because I'm queer, but because the work has to matter to me. I have to be really excited about it. I'm not really cut out to kind of direct for hire and just try to bounce around projects and make money. Like that just doesn't excite me. I have to really be excited about the material. And I think that what being in the Disney playground specifically has done for me is I've seen it all. I literally have seen all the ways a career can go, all the different ways a director can work, and all of them have their cons. But now that I've seen, where the devil hides and all of these options, it has been very clarifying in terms of how I want to move forward as a director. And I don't have that same sort of what would that be like feeling that I had, I think, right after Sundance, Dear White People Sundance, where I was like, what if I did this and what if I did it? No, now I know. Now I know what all of those things are like. And I'm not as curious. I sort of, I feel like it's been good because now I'm in my 40s. I feel like I've finally got my feet sort of on the ground. It's time to sort of just chase exactly what it is that I want.
Justin, you were 10 years removed from Dear White People, and you and I are literally the exact same age. And It's weird for me to think about not being the youngest person doing something anymore.
What do you mean?
And I would never say that to you ever. You still are the youngest Black filmmaker, and I need you to know that. Is there anyone up and coming, like any young Black filmmaker you've seen their work, or something that you've noticed that you've really taken notice of and enjoyed?
I mean, so many. Two come to mind. A.V. Rockwell, who made a spectacular movie that just it's just one of those miracle movies where how does this movie work? How is this just destroying my soul so perfectly? How did she do it? I don't know. But, she made a movie with Tiana Taylor last year called 1001, which I just thought was fantastic. And a movie that I loved and didn't really get a lot of conversation around this year was called Earth Mama by a filmmaker.
Oh, my gosh.
Savannah Leaf. This thing just, look, if it were about white people, it would just be the talk of the town. It is so fantastic. It takes this tiny subject of a woman who is pregnant and caught up in the system and trying to get clean and take care of her kids, and the movie is this big in terms of narrative space, and it just blew me away. The sumptuousness of the filmmaking, the way she directs these actors. I just was blown away by it.
That movie left me completely gutted. It's Savannah Leaf written and directed, and it was just an experience. Oh, my goodness.
And the most modest oneers I've ever seen. Because usually when a filmmaker does a oneer, you want to let everyone know what you're doing. And you want to, and she did a few of those too, where you're moving through different light spaces. But there were some scenes where there wasn't a cut, and I didn't realize it because she didn't draw my attention to it. It was so subtle, and that just takes so much confidence to work like that. I just thought it was amazing.
For an up-and-coming filmmaker or critic or just cineast who is looking to fill in the gaps of their Black film education, not that you have to give me a whole syllabus, but throw me a couple of titles, some classics, even some recent ones if you think that you've got to start here.
Oh, I think Symbiocytotoxoplasm by William Greaves is one of the most amazing films I can think of, period. But it's the only, and this movie was made in 1969.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is remarkable about it is that it really does predict the world of reality television, because the way he makes the movie is wild. It's a documentary, but it ends up being about, oh God, it's like, I don't even fully want to explain it and ruin it. But the premise is that he is making a movie, but that movie is fake. It's a documentary about him making a fake movie. And you start to follow the crew, the white, liberal, with it crew of the 1960s who are like, feeling themselves because they're working on a black man's film, and they just have so much reverence for him that they end up basically marginalizing him and try to take over the movie. And it was the first time, this movie made in 1969, I'm watching it in 2020. It's the first time my actual lived experience as a black filmmaker was articulated in a movie. And I just couldn't believe it existed and was done so sharply and so brilliantly, and 5 years before American Family, which gets all the credit for creating reality TV. It is just so great. I would absolutely start there. And don't be afraid of the title. It is so entertaining and wild. It is just one of the wildest things I've ever seen.
I got to check that out. That sounds fantastic. You've seen it, Alonso?
I have. It's great. Yeah.
It's great. I would also really, Charles Lane is another one of those filmmakers who I think gets lost because his movie came out in 1989, actually didn't get a full theatrical release. And when you think about 1989 Black cinema, we all, of course, think about Do the Right Thing, which is, a masterpiece and just one that, if you haven't seen that, you're insane. But, one to return to. But in the shadow of that movie is this other movie, Sidewalk Stories. Charles Lane made this black and white silent picture 20, 30 years before the artist. And in my opinion, this movie, it actually has a reason for doing all of that. He basically depicts, all the Charlie Chaplin stories, but as a black man, as a homeless black man on the streets of New York City. And you start to realize, wow, it's crazy how we all just think of Charlie Chaplin with Warm and Fuzzies, but a black homeless man on the streets trying to help people where he can. That doesn't hit the same way. And why is that? It makes you think about all of that while you're kind of falling in love with him, as he tries to take care of this little girl. It is just a lovely movie that, again, I saw it and I was furious that I had never seen it before, or that I had never even heard of it before.
Well, I mean, I think there was that period of Sundance movies where, I remember Sidewalk Stories in '89, and then Chameleon Street in '90, which, won awards and got very talked about, and then just did not find any kind of theatrical footing. So, for all of the agita you had with Dear White People, I mean, that you got it into theaters after Sundance, yes, and that it got to where it is, that is a step up. It's we're getting somewhere, I think.
And I think that's what I meant too when I was like, oh God, I was so depressed. And then I start to, James Baldwin has a great quote about you. You think your pain is I forget exactly the quote. I'm going to mess it up, but you think your pain is the worst in all the world, and then you read history, and that's kind of what it was. And it was sort of like, oh my God, Dear White People, it felt really new at the time, but it is in a tradition of using satire to kind of speak to two different audiences at the same time, play the market a little bit, but really kind of have a Trojan horse message that's just for us. That kind of thing has been going on since Burt Williams, who is thought of mostly as a blackface performer. But his work was really, really subversive, really incendiary. And this is 1900s, turn of the century stuff that me being able to go back to it, suddenly I can really appreciate the things that I'm able to do. Even though I still feel the limits and I still chafe at some of the edges, I'm like, but we are in a legacy, and there's going to be people coming up after me that I have to do this for too. And it just, I don't know, it makes it all more meaningful to put it into that kind of perspective.
He's writer, director, producer, Justin Simien. Justin, thank you so much for your time today on the Film Library. We really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. I love the film library. Check out some books, movies.
It's time to find out the answer to today's film library trivia question. If you guessed the 2016 film, I Am Not Your Negro, you were correct. Welcome back to the Film Library Kanopy podcast. Alonso, we just had Justin Simien on, and what a time we had.
He is one of my favorite. We have podcasted with him before, and he's just one of those people that you give him the slightest nudge, and he's got stuff to tell you, and it's informative, and it's funny, and it's honest, and a great filmmaker, but also a great podcast.
Yes,
and there aren't enough of those out there.
Both and for sure. So well spoken, so educational, so entertaining. You should check out all that he's done. You really should. And he did mention a movie that because of Kanopy, I found out about. That's Savannah Leaf's Earth Mama. And I've got to tell you, we're going to talk a little bit about Kanopy. Obviously 30,000 titles, obviously deep cinematic history, TV series, something for everybody if you just have a library card. But this movie, if it weren't for Kanopy, I would not have found this movie. And it is heartbreaking, gutting, amazingly well made. Justin said it way better than I could have, but they zoom in so close on a subject matter and give you just a systemic problem in a way that you just can't turn away from, and is so human. And I loved it. It's Savannah Leaf's Earth Mama. You definitely need to check this movie out, and it's available on Kanopy. So there's literally no excuse.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that I think, got some really strong reviews, didn't necessarily open in all the parts of the country. And so for a lot of people, this is maybe their first shot at getting to see it. And I think there's so many films like that on Kanopy where, because the way that art house and documentary distribution is set up in the United States, it is very likely that you live in a part of the country where your local theater just is not going to get these movies when they're in their original run. But thankfully, they find a home on Kanopy, and with your library card, you have access to just such a vast array of titles.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one that I really enjoyed, I Am Not Your Negro, a documentary based upon an unfinished manuscript by James Baldwin. It's narrated by Samuel L. Jackson. And I think the thing about this movie that's so powerful is it weaves together the stories of the assassinations of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. If you watch it, you would think it was made in our cultural climate in the last 2 or 3 years. No, this thing's like 8 or 9 years old, and it still hits so hard. It's depressing almost how hard it hits, but it's a phenomenal documentary.
Yeah, no. So from the great Raoul Peck, and it just goes to show you that not only has James Baldwin written books better than any of us will ever write, he can write a book proposal better than any of us will ever write, because that's what they made this movie out of. And Sam Jackson is giving such a great performance because he is narrating the film and not like going out of his way to impersonate Baldwin, but definitely kind of capturing Baldwin's cadences, the way that he observed the world. It's a really powerful film, and I think it makes a great double bill with the documentary MLK FBI, which is also on Kanopy, which is more specifically about Martin Luther King Jr. and the FBI's surveillance on him, their attempts to blackmail and control his messaging and his impact on the world. It's access to a lot of information that really had not been made public before. So it kind of gives you a look at the kind of institutional battles that MLK was having to fight against the U.S. government that was trying so hard to quash, his messaging.
Absolutely. And all of these available on Kanopy. So it goes without saying, you have the ability, as Justin was talking about during the interview, of getting educated. Unfortunately, film history, removes a lot of this from what you get in a standardized education of film. And so Kanopy's here for you. Kanopy's here to help pick up the pieces there, get some blind spots unblinded, and to watch some great movies in the process.
And he mentioned the sort of the intersection between black cinema and women's cinema, and I think one of the big titles there is 1982's Losing Ground, which is the very first feature film directed by a black woman. It's Kathleen Collins's. Actually, it's her second film, but she is considered to be the first black woman to direct feature films in the United States. And it is a film that is about a marriage. It's about academia. It covers a lot of she's throwing her arms around a lot of really big ideas, and it's a film that endures. And you can continue to see the as you look at the span, the history of black cinema. It takes us to such fascinating places that we're at now, like with films like Earth Mama, with films like Neptune Frost, which is this sort of great kind of Afrofuturist musical. Elegance Bratton's The Inspection, which is an autobiographical film about being gay and black and in the Marines during the age of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. These are all really powerful dramas. They're all part of the continuum of black cinema, and they're all available on Kanopy.
Absolutely. And one other title I do have to bring up, Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust. Yes. Just a fantastic piece of cinema. In all honesty, 3 generations of Gullah Island people. It's filmed down there in the Gullah Islands off of South Carolina. A fascinating look at real history and cinematic history at the same time. You've got this cultural clash that you can read. There's plenty of symbolism in there, but also just really great drama and amazing performances. An independent film that really, really is monumental for the early 1990s.
Yeah, and you can definitely see, the impact that Daughters of the Dust has had in everything from, Beyonce's work to the most recent Color Purple musical remake. There are visual shout outs and thematic ones. It's a film that has, it was made more than 30 years ago, but continues to resonate throughout the country.
And we've not even scratched the surface, Alonso. That's how great Kanopy is. You got over 30,000 titles to choose from. Obviously, those titles are going to vary by country and library, but all you need is a library card, and you've got your in.
Yeah, this is, like Justin was saying, so much of film history is kind of left to individuals to find for themselves. They're not going to find it in necessarily a mainstream curriculum. And so Kanopy allows you to take that dive and look for all kinds of films from all kinds of filmmakers that maybe are not considered part of the canon in some educational institutions, but they are there for you to discover, for you to enrich yourself and, expand your notions of what cinema can be.
Kanopy.com for the best video streaming and quality, thoughtful entertainment. That's where you find it all. Alonso, this has been a blast.
Always a pleasure, sir. Until we meet again, go watch something.